Good morning, everyone. How is it going today? I hope wherever you are in the world that it is going well. So I just wanted to take a moment to reintroduce myself to everyone that has begun to follow. Hi, honey. How are you? Now you can actually see me and we can have a conversation. So my name is Brianna Gravatt, and aside from all the photographs that you see and the poetry that I write alongside of it, I am also a writer, and I write more poetry. I write about experiences in the world, and I also write children's books and books, actual adult books, depending on what you consider an adult. And almost a year ago, I wrote this book and I named it Mosaic. And as you can see, the painting behind me is actually the cover of the book. And it's significant because it was painted by my dear friend Innocent, who is a Rwandan artist working out of Kigali. He's so talented, and I met him when I went to Rwanda 4 years ago now, and we spent some time together and we spoke about art and resilience and survival and all of those things that make us human. And so when I finished my book, actually, before I even started the book, I knew that I was going to use a piece of his art to illustrate the cover. And so I wrote this book because I am a writer and I can't help myself from writing. It's how I breathe, it's how I move, it's how I move in this world. And I called it Mosaic because I'm an art historian, and I understand how all those pieces of a life or many lives come together and attribute to a collective humanity. So it was my hope that when I wrote this book that I would be able to write something that other people might read and say, I experienced that too. I felt that way too. I might not have gone through the same exact thing, but man, I felt this way before. And so it was my hope with the writing of this book, with the publishing of this book, that at least one person in the world might not feel so alone and not feel like they were this lonely piece of glass or pottery or whatever it is that composes a mosaic, and know that they are able to come together and create something extremely beautiful. So whether or not I created something extremely beautiful in this, it is up for you to decide. But I find beauty in writing just as I find beauty in humanity, despite all of the sadness that transcends a lot of our days. So I've decided that on Mondays I'm going to officially launch Mosaic in Illinois. I'm going to officially launch Mosaic in February to celebrate the year anniversary of its publication. And in doing so, I hope to get a little bit more interest in what I have written. So today I'm going to read you a chapter from Mosaic, a chapter that I had more difficulty living than I had in writing. And I guess that's what happens when you are young and you fall in love and you think that kind of love lasts forever rather than the length in which it should last. And I'm a hopeful woman, and I like to see the best in people, and I hope for the best for people. And so when I was 26 years old, I got married, and only a few years later I got divorced because I learned that marriage is not always, thank you, darling. Love is not always the answer. Love is not always enough. Love is the answer. That's a lie. Love is a wonderful, wonderful thing, but love is not always enough, and you need to work with people to really come together and to build relationships. So this chapter that I'm reading from my book that I wrote, is on divorce. And since it is winter, I figured this would be a great chapter to go with. Soon after, the leaves fell, and then the snows, and it was winter. It was a winter without the sun, without warmth, without Oliver. His name was not Oliver, by the way. I just changed it for the book. The envelope was postmarked December 24th. I knew what it was, and still I opened it. Papers with his signature, papers with my signature. Some inks are permanent. That Christmas, for the first time, there was only 5 of us eating leftovers at an otherwise empty table. My winter had begun. January arrived, and with it a new decade. Overcome by an indescribable grief, there were days when I found myself on the floor, unable to escape from the ground that constantly gave way beneath my feet, where I learned that sometimes the bottom is not always made of rocks. Sometimes there is no bottom at all. Determined to find answers where often there are none, I continuously researched the Kubler-Ross model in order to construct a timeline of just how long it would take for me to get over Oliver, as if divorce was a chronological event in which progress is made from one stage to another without relapsing into previous stages. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression. The first 4 I had down to an art form, especially anger. But the last one, acceptance, that was going to take a while. I didn't know it then just how overrated anger actually is. In those nights too long and those days too short, I did not know the difference between struggle and surrender. And so at all hours of the day, I showed up on my mother's doorstep and crawled inside of her arms, begging her to take my pain away, to make it stop. But she could not do any of that. All she could do was hold me and tell me that not all love was lost. Just one. Just one. Then, as now, as always, my mother was and is my sun, my moon, my North Star, my Southern Cross, my light in the darkness, except she is the opposite of gravity. When I fall, when any of us have fallen, she pulls us up. That winter, I went to Paris, even though this was not something that I could actually afford, especially since I had my bank on speed dial, just to determine whether or not food was a viable option in the days between my paychecks. But still, to Paris I went, nevertheless, with my old friend Nina, to stand in front of the Eiffel Tower, again, just as I did before all of this began, without knowing how it would end. Thank you. Of course, like a fool, I went to London first, because it was cheaper and easier to fly to England. Never mind the fact that enough miles had been earned over the years for a free flight to anywhere in Europe, and because that is also where Nina lived. It was most certainly not because Oliver was there, and I still loved him. Definitely not because of that. In January, I found myself in his flat, sitting across from my now ex-husband, as he held a new book in his hand. He wore reading glasses, and around his wrist there was a new tattoo, so different than the tattoos that stretched between his shoulder blades and the cuneate muscles of his arm. That night, I slept on the pull-out couch in his living room as he slept in his bed upstairs. In the morning, he woke me up before he left for work to say one final goodbye. He kissed me on the cheek close to my lips with his hand lingering on my hip. He smiled as he walked out the door, never to be seen again. After Paris, I returned to an apartment empty except for the memories that hung in the air and a lifetime of books on the shelf. All too willing to remain in the darkness of my own making, I lit few candles and stared at the titles that leaned against the wall. In the flickering light, the wings of a butterfly caught my eye. Papillon. This was the book that Oliver was reading the night that we first met. And as I leafed through its pages, I wondered whether it was the imprisonment that Oliver identified with most, or was it the escape? Unable to understand or accept the ambiguity of this life, I went outside and pulled a cigarette from the pack that I bought for moments such as this. Don't smoke anymore, just when I'm going through divorce. And lit one cigarette and then another and watched the rings of blue smoke rise into the cold, cold night. Not easily overcome with religious zeal or political fervor, but terrified by my own heartache and spellbound by the ends of the cigarettes burning harsh and red, I decided to have a fallo del coro, a bonfire of my heart. Somehow I led myself to believe that if there was nothing left to remind me of winter, of Oliver, that the pain would go away, that if I didn't have the letters that he wrote or the cards that he sent, that I too could pretend that he did not exist. So a match was lit, and into the pyre went photographs of the two of us dancing to Pen Harper on our wedding day, us returning to San Francisco after an afternoon of drinking Cabernet Sauvignon in Napa Valley, and us on the bow of a sailboat watching the sky go from blue to indigo to black to night. Us smiling, us laughing, us happy. Birthday cards, love notes, not so love notes, and letters that told of a forever that ceased to exist. And as the last of the flames turned to ashes into dust, I thought to myself, how tightly we cling to our failures, how lightly we embrace our successes. Long after the fire went out, I held on to Oliver. It took years to let him go. So if you just joined in, I was reading an excerpt from my memoir, Mosaic. So for the next month, I'm going to be reading some excerpts from it, and then I will go into a official launch in February to get this book hopefully out into the world a little bit more and get more people reading, especially if reading was your resolution for 2018. It should be a resolution for every day. Anyway, thanks for joining in, guys. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day, and yeah, I'll see you next week about the same time.